So I'm going to quickly take you through some of the materials that we like to use at the studio. Just for those who don't know, and thank you, Mick, for your introduction. We're about a 60-strong practice in Clerkenwell, but, and this is kind of where I want to be, there was an extraordinary sense of atmosphere and color and buzz, and therefore it made me feel that maybe that our obsession with architectural detail sometimes is maybe over-exaggerated, and actually with very little things like a bit of signage and beautiful graphics and neons and orange color, and even when shops feel like they're kind of falling apart, there's this kind of really an inner beauty that I was touched by. And over the years, I've been kind of collecting materials and images of materials that I love, and they are all. The other thing I was thinking about when in India is the term Wabi-Sabi, which is a Japanese term, not an Indian term. About I think it's generally talked about as a kind of the beauty of imperfection. But I see it's more than that. It's more the beauty of materials have a lifespan like we have a lifespan, and we start young and then we age and then we die, and over that period the material is not perfect as it was originally, but it captures that kind of erosion and saltedness, and the timber becomes white and the rocks become filled with lichen, and so that's kind of one of the things that I'm quite interested in, is the kind of avoiding that kind of cleanliness of perfect materials. I like materials to be a little bit like they've aged a bit. I also like textures. I love, you know, rather than saying I want the wall to be yellow, I'd like it to be in different shades of yellow or different shades of orange, and if the material is not quite flat, then it gets that sense of shadow and that sense of depth. And for me, always the fight in architecture is about depth, because depth immediately reveals shade and light and shadows. I really like this image because of the car that disappears. The car's got a camouflage, and then it's camouflaged by the African pattern on the back. I thought that's pretty cool. And I also love things that you feel like the sense of the craft and the weaving of the materials. A timber making in Esuera, basket weaving. This is a really early project for the studio. We were inheriting sort of 1950s 3-story buildings on the high street. We were next to a station. We wanted to be higher, but to be higher, we had to kind of fold the building in a series of curves that have that material that is reflective and has therefore different textures that reflect the sun. And by doing that, the building is no longer so imposing, because it's half of its mass is reflecting the sky, and because of its curve, you don't read the sharp angles of shadow, you read the soft shadows. And then when it cantilevers, we just paint the underside in orange just to lift the difference of materials. Whoop. Are you messing? This is called the shawl. It was intended, actually, it should have been trees. There wasn't enough trees for the Olympic Games because it would have taken too long. We made those metallic trees. We wanted them to have different shades, and we discovered something wonderful, which is that if you dip titanium in a bath of electrolysis at different voltages, you get different colors. And so we created these kind of trees, these leaves that move in the wind gently, made of titanium, that are, again, if you look at them very closely, they're kind of riveted and they have bumps and deformation. And so on this north elevation, there was still this kind of wonderful sense of reflection of the sky. And it's like we're not hiding the building behind, we're just creating like a shade, a screen, and like a little veil. And then it's called the Old Vinyl Factory in Hayes. We did the master plan, and then we've done 3 or 4 buildings on that, 2 of which are currently finishing. The first one is called the Boiler House. This is a CGI of the Boiler House. It's the Boiler House used to be where the water was being boiled for the record making of the EMI factory. And they had this kind of gently tapering facade. So we thought we'd make a CLT, cross-laminated timber building clad in stainless steel. And this is the building nearly, the scaffolding is coming down as we speak. And it's made of different shades of stainless steel. Some is reflective by 100% and then others are only by 20%. So you get this moment where sometimes you see the sky in the facade, and because it's tilting, you kind of get really a sense that the building melts with the sky. That's the feeling that we're looking for. The other, next to the Boiler House, is the Powerhouse. This is a render from the early days. And this is the element that we've added to the building, which is a kind of expanded metal green anodized material. And we were always told that of all the colors, green is the hardest color to anodize because you can't control the shades very well. But in a funny way, again, in the kind of spirit that of the Wabi-Sabi kind of way of thinking, those different shades of green actually make me feel like the building is more alive than if it was all perfectly uniform. And then we took on this kind of idea of the expanded metal, but we curved it on a project called the Rich Estate, which I know Phil had a project next door to us. And this is the screen here. The building is square, and the expanded metal is curving away from the facade to create moments where the balconies, the winter gardens, just an extra skin, which is still letting light come through to the facade of the building, but also creates a softness within a kind of cocoon of rectangular industrial buildings. I don't know why it jumps like that. You are messing, aren't you? Let go of the computer. And here, what we were trying to do is to try to create a kind of a sense of an undulating ribbon that holds the whole building together. So it's like, in fashion sometimes you have these kind of ribbons that kind of hold the whole bodies together. And this is also now coming out of, so next year I'll be able to show you the finished work. That's kind of the bronze colored aluminium cladding and the curved stone facing of the facade. It's at a slightly different scale. We're in Fish Island in Hackney Wick, and here it is 47 flats and some artist studios at ground level. We're next to the canal, and our kind of aesthetic starting point was on the canal in the 18th and 19th century. It was mostly how to build London, and boats were carrying timber. And then the timber wasn't quite dry, and they would go into storage spaces, into timber yards, where the wood was protected from the rain, but the timber was latticed to let the ventilation of the timber. And so we took that kind of vernacular and used the black timber as a kind of starting point. And again, rather than have a big mass, we divided the mass into three elements, just so that it made friends with its neighbors. And again, that kind of the building is nearly finished. It will be finished in a couple of months' time. But that kind of big, fat timber structure feels like it'll age well and have a real strong vernacular presence. One of our earlier projects, and one that I still love, of creating 136 flats above a new library at no cost to the public purse, a public library and a public health center. And it seemed like inconceivable to put 136 flats in the high street, but by curving the building, we were able to, and stepping the elevation, what is an 11-story building feels like a 7 or 8-story building. And by curving the facade, again, the same discussion was had in the studio about how we get nice soft shadows rather than sharp angular shadows. And then we made the windows out of stainless steel, and at night time the buses and the lights of the city reflect on this facade and kind of give it a different elevational treatment. And then we also asked artist Andrew Logan to ask children to give objects, and he put all the objects on the letters that make the letters library on the pavement. So a really beautiful piece of artwork at ground level. One of the things that we want to do this year is to work more and more with artists, because they have a way of thinking about buildings that is, they can think about speed, or they can think about porosity, or they can think about where sometimes as architects we become so obsessed about the pragmatics of the project that we forget about these things. And this was the kind of the brick slips that we were able to use that have that mica and that reflection in the facade that was sufficiently thin that we could get those curves on the facade. This is a kind of funny project. We're in UNESCO protected Bath. We had to use stone. We thought we would be forced to make rectangular buildings. Somehow a planning council said, why don't you make the building curved? We didn't have to be asked twice, but we didn't know exactly how you could curve stone. And then we thought, well, if it's all stone, it's going to be a little bit somber. And we went to the Roman baths, and the Roman baths had water flowing from the river, and it had this kind of orange ferruginous water staining that was orange. And we thought, oh, maybe that would be a touch of color that we could add to the building. And now it's built, and Chris Nicholson, I think, have done a wonderful job of a curved stone building, these little lovely touches of orange. And then the balustrading is perfect. It really relates to Bath in the sense that in the Georgian Bath, you don't project the balcony, you let it just float in front of the elevation such that it doesn't stain the facade. And it relates to the Brunel Bridge. You see the Brunel Bridge on the bottom left-hand side has this inclined pattern, and we took that as a kind of starting point for the balustrading of the facade. And the people have moved into the building last month. It's a building that is curved also because it's an island building, it's a pavilion building. You have to, there's no back, so there's nowhere to hide. The whole building has to have to be a facade. Wonderful last building here is Caxton Works in Canning Town. Industrial area, we had to preserve the industrial quantum. We couldn't just push it further afield outside of London. So we took the mantle and we said, okay, let's take the industry, put it underneath the building, build a residential above, and then just to remind people on the skyline, we just kept some of the industrial kind of silhouette of the building with these scalloped galvanized steel rooftops. And so we worked really hard to keep that two-story kind of court 10 and timber facade, kept it raw with those big Caxton letters. Caxton was the man who invented the printer. We also added some touches of ceramic, green ceramics on the facade, again to play with that visual effect of not reading the whole building. And then added touches of yellow to kind of unify the brand of the industrial spaces. They just opened, so we're now waiting for industry to move in and looking forward to that interaction. I guess that I'm okay on time. I guess that another passion of our studio is giving old buildings a second life, and we've been lucky to have been responsible with Hawkins Brown for the refurbishment of Park Hill in Sheffield, and there it was a building that was at the 11th hour of being demolished, and it was saved by English Heritage, but they had a kind of really good attitude about the heritage, and so we were able to go from the top image to the bottom image, or the left image to the right image, where we replaced the brick, which was kind of somber and didn't let enough light into the flat, and reverse the brick and the glass to kind of maximize daylight, and also just kind of add a little bit of color and just kind of make the building smile from a distance in the vistas of the main city. Then we repaired the concrete, and for me this is like a really joyful image, an image where it's like a hive of lots of little families living together into the space, and the gradation of reds to orange to yellow, it follows the intelligence of how the flats are divided by streets in the sky at different stages of the verticality of the building. In a similar vein, we are also refurbishing the Balfront building, Balfront Tower by Erno Golfinger. On the left is the existing, on the right is the proposed. You can see we've added a parapet on the top, we've cleaned up the shop at the ground level, but most importantly, we've cleaned up the concrete, we've brought back the aggregate on the facade, and we've replaced the PVC cladding that was changed in the 70s, and we're putting aluminium bronze facade replacement with inner ventilation. Last project, we did 2 or 3 years ago a design Indian for the London Underground. So we kind of created a little Bible of how to, the London Underground was like a wonderful element of design. It was practically perfection. In the 1930s and the 50s, it was really wonderful. Little by little, a bit of advertising, a bit of signage, a bit of CCTV here, kind of destroyed the overall look. So we had to kind of take a deep breath and say, let's use an interesting palette of material. Let's use material that are that you touch and that are pleasant to feel, and then be clear about signage and branding and all of that. So we created this kind of quite flexible palette of materials with blues and bronze and whites and concretes, and created this kind of vocabulary that is easy for anybody to take on a station. They know what to do with the choice of material, the advertising, the lighting, the signage, and so on. Thank you very much.